All right, let's dive into something that can seriously level up how we build software. Domain-driven design, or DDD. Look, it's all about tackling complexity head-on and building software that actually speaks the same language as the business it's for.
You know the feeling, right? You start a new project, everything's clean, organized, makes perfect sense, and then, fast forward 6 months, and it's this tangled web that nobody, not even the original developers, fully understands. So why does this keep happening? Well, the real problem, more often than not, isn't technical. It's a communication problem.
And that brings us right to the heart of the issue, this massive gap that opens up between the business experts, the people who know what the company needs, and the development team who's trying to build it. They're both aiming for the same goal, but it's like they're speaking completely different languages.
And this right here perfectly illustrates that gap. The business expert says shopping basket. Simple. Everyone gets it. But in the code, it's called a user cart object. Now that might seem like a tiny, harmless difference, but when you multiply these little misunderstandings across an entire project, they build up, creating a huge disconnect. You end up with software that kinda sorta does what the business needs, but not really.
Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we get everyone on the same page? Well, that's exactly where domain-driven design comes into play. And it's not some new, shiny framework you have to learn. Think of it more as a philosophy, a whole new way of thinking that's designed to pull our software and the business domain into perfect alignment. So at its core, DDD is all about one thing: creating a rich, expressive software model of the business domain. The entire goal is to make the software a direct reflection of how the business actually works and thinks, using the exact same language and concepts that the domain experts, the people who live and breathe this stuff every day, use. It really boils down to 3 key pillars. First, there's the domain. That's just the world you're working in, shipping, billing, inventory, whatever. Second, we create a model, which is our simplified software version of that domain. And then the most important part, the glue that holds everything together, is the ubiquitous language. This is a single, shared vocabulary that everybody, and I mean everybody, agrees to use. And this really gets to the core of what a ubiquitous language is. It's not just a friendly suggestion. It is a strict, unbreakable rule. If the team decides the official term is cart, then that is the only word you use, in meetings, in your design documents, and most importantly, in the code itself. All those other synonyms, gone. This just ruthlessly eliminates ambiguity. So building this amazing model starts with the 10,000-foot view. DDD splits the whole process into 2 major phases, and the first one is called strategic design. You can think of this as creating the master architectural blueprint for your entire business domain. Now, the most important tool we have in strategic design is the bounded context. Look, a big domain like a whole e-commerce platform is just way too complicated to model all at once. So what do? We draw clear boundaries around the different parts of the business. Inside each of these boundaries, or contexts, our model and our language have a very specific, crystal clear meaning. Let's use a real-world example, like Netflix. Think about it. In their billing context, a user is a customer. What defines them? Their credit card info, their subscription plan. But in the streaming context, that same exact person is a viewer. And what defines them there? Their watch history, their profile settings. It's the same real person, but they are represented by completely different models because they exist in different bounded contexts. This separation is absolutely key to taming complexity. Of course, these different contexts can't live in total isolation. They need to talk to each other. We actually map out those conversations using something called a context map. And to make sure one context's model doesn't leak into another and cause confusion, we can use a clever pattern called an anti-corruption layer. It basically acts as a dedicated translator between the 2 contexts, keeping them clean and independent. Okay, so once we have that high-level blueprint from strategic design, we can zoom in and start focusing on the actual building blocks. This next phase is called tactical design, and it's all about the specific patterns we use to build our domain model inside the code. 2 of the most fundamental building blocks you'll encounter are entities and value objects. An entity, like a customer, is something with a unique identity that persists over time, no matter what its attributes are. A value object, on the other hand, like an address, is defined only by its values. And here's the crucial difference. Value objects are immutable. You don't change an address, you just create a whole new one to replace it. This little rule prevents so many unexpected bugs.
So now that we have all these objects, how do we manage changes to them while making sure everything stays consistent with our business rules? Well, we group related objects together into a cluster called an aggregate. And here's the key. That whole cluster has one single entry point, an entity known as the aggregate root.
This is where the real power comes in.
Any outside system that wants to change something inside the aggregate must go through the aggregate route. So you don't just add a line item to an order directly, no. You tell the order object, hey, add this item. The order then acts like a gatekeeper. It checks all the business rules. Is the item in stock? Is the customer allowed to buy this? And only if everything is valid does it allow the change. This creates a powerful boundary of consistency.
Now, sometimes you have a piece of business logic that doesn't really belong to any single entity. A classic example is sending a confirmation email. For things like that, we use services. These are basically stateless operations. But a word of warning here, if you start putting all your logic in services, you end up with what's called an anemic model, where your entities are just dumb bags of data, and that completely defeats the purpose of DDD.
So, let's take a breath. We've gone from the big picture strategic design with bounded contexts all the way down to the nitty-gritty tactical details of building aggregates. Now let's tie it all together and talk about why this is all worth the effort. I mean, after all this talk about models, languages, contexts, and aggregates, you've got to be asking, why go through all this trouble? What's the real tangible payoff at the end of the day?
Well, the payoff is huge. Your code stops being just a jumble of functions and classes and starts telling the story of your business. It becomes so much easier to maintain and change over time because it's organized around stable business ideas, not some temporary technical choice. It naturally forces developers and business experts to actually talk to each other and collaborate. And maybe most importantly, it helps you laser focus on your core domain, the part of your software that actually makes you money and gives you a competitive edge.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought to take back to your own projects. Take a hard look at your code. Is it telling a clear, cohesive story about the business problem you're trying to solve? Or has it just become a disconnected bag of data and logic? Domain-driven design gives you a powerful toolkit to make sure you're always building the former.